Nick, welcome to the Six Sales podcast. How are you?
I'm very well, Mike. Thank you very much for asking me along.
Absolutely. I'm really interested and really excited for this one. I woke up this morning, you probably don't need to know this, oversharing perhaps, but in the shower I was thinking of things that I wanted to ask you. So yeah, really looking forward to this one. There's a lot being spoken about around retail media and what it is and isn't and will and won't be. So yeah, really excited to dig into that with you today. Just to kick off, as is traditional, could you give us a bit of an oversight into your role at Tesco Media Insights Platform, which I'm just going to refer to as Tesco Media from now on. Sorry if that offends anyone, but it's a bit of a mouthful.
Fine.
Yeah, what your role is and how you came to be there over the last few years.
I will do. So I'm Client Development Director at the Tesco Media Insight Platform. So that consists of two core teams, really. So strategic planning. So that's working with CPGs and agencies to build communications plans which address their particular objectives. So interestingly, quite a few people within that team are ex-agency. And also an agency development team. So the business, people talk about retail media as if it's a new thing. And the reality is that dunnhumby and Tesco have had a retail media business for 25, 30 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Working predominantly with shopper marketing teams at clients.
Yeah.
As the proposition has developed and expanded, which I'm sure we'll come on to, beyond in-store, then there's been a need to expand those depths of relationships. So that's both within a CPG, so conversations with brand teams and heads of media and things like that, but also within agencies. So there are lots of agencies that are fascinated about the opportunity, obviously advising on broader communications plans. So we've got a specific agency development team that's been set up. So they're the two teams that I look after. Prior to this role, I was head of media at Tesco for about 5 years, so responsible for Tesco's 100 million plus media investment, which was a great job, absolutely loved it. Started there at the beginning of the turnaround plan and was part of a team that helped really rebuild the brand over through 2017 through to 2022. That was brilliant. And then the bulk of my career has been agency side. So prior to that, I was at Mindshare, working on some of the most amazing clients that I had the chance to work with. So I've worked agency side, I've been a client and media owner really, so I've done all three.
Technically internal agency now?
Sort of. So it's we've got a very integrated Tesco and dunnhumby team across the business, so it's critical that happens. You can't just give it away to a team that's not integrated with the rest of the business, so that's been great.
So there's been a lot of column inches about retail media, but I think people will be coming into this podcast from different knowledge bases. Let's say some people might be sort of exploring it perhaps for the first time. Other people a little bit more au fait. But just I think so we can start off on the right footing. If you could just maybe tell us what you think retail media is, how you would define that, and what a retail media network is, and how you would define that. That would be a good starting point, I think, for our conversation.
Brilliant. So I would describe it as marketing to a retailer's customers, sort of either at the point of purchase or at the point of brand choice. And the second point is really important. So point of purchase might be I'm in a store and I haven't decided which particular brand I want to buy in a category, and a brand could communicate at that particular point. And as we know, for certain categories, a huge amount of decision making takes place at the last minute. So it's really important that you communicate at that time. But increasingly, and I'm sure we'll come on to this, I think if you just think about retail media as point of purchase media, then you're missing the trick. So increasingly, it's becoming much more full funnel, which is why I talk about the point of choice. So I think it has a role to play in brand consideration activity and brand awareness activity, often outside of the store. So one of the ways that I suppose the most simple way that we talk about it is, whilst we have dozens of channels that brands can use, if you boil it down, it actually comes down to three things. So you've got on-site advertising, you've got off-site advertising, and you've got in-store advertising. So on-site, in our instance, Tesco.com. So the opportunities range from sponsored advertising, so similar to Google, etc., through to display advertising, through to brand pages and brand zones within Tesco.com. So that's a big chunk of it.
Yeah.
Second big chunk of it is what we call off-site. So that's where we're using Clubcard data and partnering with either publishers or broadcasters who've also got really extensive data to be able to sharpen a brand's targeting on their platforms. So that's really exciting, which is why I think it's become much broader than just point of purchase. And the final area is we call it connected store. So if I wind back 15 years, that would have been very traditional cardboard point of sale in the store environment, which still exists and still has a role to play. But increasingly it's becoming digital. So that might be digital screens in store, which we're seeing, we're going through a huge installation program of those at the moment. We allow advertising on scan as you shop devices, which I think is super interesting. Radio, JC&Co, we have a partnership, so we've got smart screen 6 sheets outside the store as you go in. So there's this plethora of different channels within the store environment, which allow brands to communicate it. And then the retail media network is the retailer that serves all of these channel opportunities to a particular brand. And I think the reason that a network is used is that it's not just, it's a combination of assets and data. So assets being the physical assets that a brand can advertise upon, and data obviously being absolutely critical to fuel that particular media. Okay,
cool. So in terms of the data then, I saw a stat, which I think it might even been you that presented, I'm not sure. It said that there's 21 million households in the UK that Tesco's have some sort of data on, which is out of 28 million, is that right?
Yeah.
That's quite a big
it's quite large
penetration.
Yeah.
What data do you typically have on an individual or a household? So I'm thinking about sample size of one. I'm thinking about my house. My wife has a Tesco's Clubcard that she would have signed up for. So I assume you have her name, date of birth, address, well, obviously address, and maybe some other things that she had to fill in when she got that Clubcard. But then perhaps for me and my daughter and my son, you maybe have less individual data, but more, what we buy, that we have an unhealthy obsession with chicken and beans and whatever. So what does that footprint of data look like? And how does it differ from the person that physically signed up from the card to the household as a whole?
Yeah. So as you say, there are 21 million households in the UK that have Clubcard. That has expanded quite significantly over the last few years. And the reason it's expanded is in 2019, Tesco introduced something called Clubcard prices, where promotions are accessible if you have Clubcard. So in the industry, it's referred to as member pricing. Sainsbury's do exactly the same with Nectar pricing. Ever since that was introduced in 2019, the usage of Clubcard has accelerated significantly. So in large stores, over 85% of transactions take place with a Clubcard. So the volume, scale and frequency of the data is significant, but it is at a household level. So you made a really important point there, that it is at a household level. What we can then do with it, I think, is the most interesting thing. And I suppose at the heart of it, and Tesco would say this, is that the customer is the most important thing. And that's the other reason why I think retail media is growing, actually, because if you take it to its natural conclusion, then retail media should allow brands and the retailer to offer the most relevant, the most personalised messaging to customers rather than communicating stuff that they're never going to be interested in, which I think is quite an interesting change from a lot of other media. So if you think about some of the examples, what do I mean by that? What does that mean in practice? So let's say you're launching a piece of MPD. Then
MPD?
Sorry, new product design.
Okay.
New product. I won't use the acronyms.
Yeah.
Let's say you're launching a new product, and you might have a reasonable budget, but not a massive budget, and you want to really hone in on those people that you think are going to trial that product for the first time. Then we can absolutely identify people who are most likely to trial new products, who are most likely to switch perhaps in a category, and target those people specifically.
Based on the fact they've done that before, they switched before.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's behaviourally based targeting, based on their shopping transactional behaviour. Or it could be that a brand is losing frequency of purchase. Who are those customers? Why are they doing so? What can we do to communicate to them? Or it could be, I'm launching a sustainable. You could go outside of the category, so you could use other cues. So let's say you're launching a sustainable focus brand in a category. we could start to identify people who buy sustainable products and clearly have an interest in that particular type of purchase. So it allows brands to be much more insightful and targeted in the way that they communicate. So we talk about 1,000 pieces of customer DNA that we've got, and all of that is fueled by this brilliant data science that dunnhumby has built over the last sort of 25, 30 years or so. And obviously, as the retail media environment has become more digital and the growth of partnerships has expanded, then it's allowed us to use that data in an aggregated but anonymized way, but in a way that allows brands to be much more efficient. And I suppose the final part to it, which I'm sure we'll come on to, is not only can you reach people in that targeted way, you can also measure impact in a way that perhaps you might not be able to do in most media. And what do I mean by that? So simple exposure data of media versus customer groups. Has there been a change in their behaviour? So many people refer to it as the closed loop within retail media, which I think is super exciting. So for me, what I love is the work that we do with agencies, CPGs, or planners to create some of those examples. I'll give you a really good example actually, if it's helpful. So we did some great work with L'Oreal last year, and whilst Tesco's important for L'Oreal, L'Oreal obviously has other retailers that it works with as well, and not every health and beauty isn't the most penetrated category within Tesco. So about 40% of Tesco customers shop the health and beauty aisle.
Right.
Whereas most categories it's 70%, 80%. So obviously it was to the benefit of both Tesco and L'Oreal to identify customers and potentially grow the category within Tesco. So we did a whole load of propensity modelling, in essence, taking people who show every inclination that they should be buying the skincare category or the hair care category. We did it for both, and identified a group of about 3 million people, customers, that we targeted, not in a very expensive way at all, and the impact was phenomenal, and the return on investment was phenomenal, and that was all done because the client was really clear from the outset, this is my business challenge, this is what I want to achieve, and the team worked really closely together to collaborate to produce an audience that delivered for them.
Okay, and I guess as well, if you're a challenger brand, so let's say you were, I don't even know if they're a challenger brand anymore. They're certainly dominating our household. But let's take Branston Beans, for example.
Yeah.
I think they're probably a challenger brand to Heinz.
Yeah.
We used to have Heinz. I don't know what happened. My wife's changed her taste, and suddenly now she'll only eat Branston. But anyway, that's again probably an overshare. But so if you were Branston Beans and you were thinking, okay, we want to get new customers into the category of beans, but actually the most likely source of new customers for us are people that are currently buying Heinz. So. Yeah. You could essentially power both on Tesco.com and across the wider open web the ability for Branston Beans to serve brand advertising to everybody that's bought Heinz beans, let's say. Yeah. Do you go that granular?
Yeah.
And maybe do that for a period of time, and then perhaps use like an omni-channel DSP to try and lead them from, on your site it talks about it being like from sofa to store. So you could essentially run a brand campaign while they're at home or when they're around and about town, and then as they're driving towards the store or however they're getting to the store, start to remind them of that campaign all the way down to the aisle where the beans are, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then the closed loop bit shows you, and that's what happened. So you could maybe split the number of people that buy Heinz beans. Let's say there's 10 million and 10 million households, and we'll only run the campaign to those 10 million households, and then we'll see if there's an uplift in actual purchases in store from the ones that we advertise to.
That's exactly it. So let's take the Branston Beans example. So you could identify people who have never bought Branston Beans. You could identify people who used to buy Branston Beans but don't anymore for some reason. You could identify people who only buy Branston Beans on promotion. You could identify people who don't buy the category whatsoever. So anything, in essence.
I don't know who these people are, but I'm sure they're out there.
I'm sure they're there. What we don't really allow people to do is target specific competitors.
Right.
But you can target category buyers who don't buy your particular product. So in that instance, it's pretty obvious it's going to be Heinz, right?
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
actually, I suppose it doesn't really matter. Like if I'm Branson, I want people that buy beans and they're not mine. It doesn't necessarily matter if they were Heinz or not. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So then what you do is you then think of, right, so here's this audience that I've created. How might I want to reach this audience? So I might want to reach them when they're in from sofa to store in consideration mode in sofa. So examples of channels there could be the Tesco magazine, which people always get surprised when I tell them this stat. It's the most read magazine in the country.
Really?
Yeah, it has over 5 million readers, which is phenomenal. And print is still
Sorry to play devil's advocate, but is that read or it was delivered to?
picked up in store
Okay.
and read on average 28 minutes.
Okay. Interesting.
According to data. So anyway, so that's an example of a opportunity.
And is that part of the Tesco Media network?
Yeah, it is. So that's an example of a more consideration driving media that you might want to think about. Another example could be a partnership with the broadcasters that we have in place. So we've got partnerships with ITV, Channel 4 and Sky. So you could use the AdSmart proposition with Sky, for example, to target infrequent Branson buyers or category buyers on TV. We then talk about the journey to store. So that could be the app. What I didn't say when I talked about Clubcard actually is that it is increasingly app focused. So of the 21 million households, over 11 million of them, it's all through the app, which is obviously.
Does that give you additional data?
It doesn't really give additional data. It's more it consolidates the data in a better way than having plastic, which we used to have. So.
Sorry, you were distinguishing between plastic and app, not app and desktop.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Got
it. So it could be app. It could be JCD Go screens that I just talked about. So any opportunity on the move, and then in store itself. So I've already talked about some of these opportunities. So point of sale, digital screens, scan as you shop, experiential and sampling, which takes place in store, still really important. Radio, all absolutely critical. So brand could elect what's used. So clearly the audience targeting has different degrees of efficiency depending on which channel you're using. So on a very digital channel, it's clearly brilliant. On a more broadcast channels such as a magazine, less so, but it will be playing a slightly different role on the plan. It's an exciting, and I think the reason we talk about from sofa to store is that I think it's changing, but that there has been a perception in the industry in the past that retail media is just the bottom bit, and it's just the point of purchase bit, which is really important. Don't get me wrong; it's critical. But I think it's so much bigger than that. So if you can make your TV planning 3 times more effective because you're targeting a specific audience that is going to interact in a certain way, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And it leads me to think about that example, the Branson example again. Might you create different messaging for different segments?
Yeah.
Promotional buyers, very different to people who've never bought it before to people who are loyalists, obviously. So you might want to communicate something different, and you can, because you can create those segments. So I think it's fascinating. I think it's endless, really. So much of that interest is driven by people who are really open with their business objectives, want to collaborate with Tesco and with dunnhumby to create growth together. And as ever with these things, so much of the work is done on that planning stage to okay, this is what we're going to do, this is the audience, this is how we're going to measure it, to see the final impact. So I think that's why it's gaining the traction.
So the sofa to store thing is like super interesting to me, and I think if you so I used to work with a company. I'll step back. So I used to work with a company that doesn't exist anymore, but they used to track movement data of people in app via an SDK in lots of different apps across the country, and so they could tell people that went to, let's say, for using Tesco's, because since I'm talking to you, why not? That Tesco store, that's where they live. And in the old days of location-based targeting, what people would do is they would draw a 3-mile concentric circle around a store and say that's where our audience are. But actually, the truth is wildly different to that. I mean, it looks more like a Jackson Pollock than a circle, right? Like they're all over the place, and that could be because there's a major road that runs between where they live and where your store is, so it's easier to go north than south. Let's say it could be a railway line. In my own road, there's behind the houses opposite my houses, there's a railway line. Now you could barely see it on a map, and it looks like, oh, that's only 100 yards away. But there's an Indian restaurant. I love Indian food. 100 yards away from my house, but it would involve me going up the stairs, across the station, down the stairs, and then doing that in reverse. So I'm just not going to go to that store. So they may as well be advertising to somebody in a different town because of the geography. So what you could do with this, couldn't you, if you were working with an omnichannel DSP, is you could layer, let's say, the Branson example again, so you could layer where have people in the category bought beans and where do they live in terms of high density, low density, because it's not even. You might think, oh, well, it'll be really even, but it won't be. If you imagine a dark colour and a light colour based on density of where people live, there'll be areas that are darker and lighter. And then you can start to change the messaging, to your point, around maybe more activation in high, maybe Branston's a bit niche for this particular example, but there's a lot of people that buy beans in these sorts of areas and maybe less in this.
Yeah.
Maybe it's too niche, but you take my point. And then, so maybe it's more brand building that we need to do in those areas because they're quite lightly populated with people that are bought in the category. And over here we have really dense, for some reason they love the beans in this postcode, and so maybe that's more of an activation message, and then think about what journeys are they going to be doing between sofa and store, and what outdoor will they pass, and what digital audio will they be listening to, and how many times can you basically sort of throw a little bit of Branston paint on them between sofa and store, so that they're kind of primed by the time they get there.
Yeah, agree. And then, what's really interesting in this space is clean room technology, isn't it? Where, and I don't claim to be an expert in this, but I understand the benefit of it. Where a collaboration between 2 or 3 different partners can allow you to magic out the most insightful planning. So that could be, as you've described. So what Clubcard data is behavioural. It's brilliant. It's got huge scale, but it doesn't tell you everything. Of course, it doesn't. And so if you might want to think about partnering with brands that do have more in-depth location data, or even a brand's first-party database themselves, which conversations that we're having live, is you can make that data even richer, and that data can become really interesting. So InfoSum, for example, Power Hour ITV partnership.
Yeah.
Really, really successfully. So brilliant matching between Clubcard and the ITV database. But add to that a brand's own first-party data, or add to that ITV's own data, it just becomes even more powerful.
Yeah.
So we're really open for those sort of data partnership discussions, definitely. Obviously at an aggregated and secure and private level, which clean rooms allow you to do.
Yeah. So is that the primary way that you would enable off-site advertising via a clean room?
Yeah. So typically we use
at a DSP. At DSP level, you would do that, or would it have to be each individual publisher would have to have enough first-party data to match in order to be able to run the campaign?
Yeah. So the first thing that we do is work through the best possible data onboarder for that partnership, because the most important thing you want to do is, as you say, scale. There's no point creating a brilliant audience, but then only being able to reach 3% of them. So we actually have different partners in place. So LiveRamp are another one. So we have different partners in place for different publishers, and that's because of the process that is best for that particular publisher. So the ambition is so people can reach as many of these particular customers as possible. So absolutely, that's the key point that we focus on. So yeah, different partners in place, but the concept is the same. The concept is absolutely the same. So how can you fuel that particular media? So the Sky partnership has been going on for a year. I mean that's been going on for 10 years or so. We've recently rebooted it. Have enhanced the amount of data matching capabilities that we've got within it, which is brilliant. And it just gives fantastic opportunities for brands. And not only does it allow them to target, it also allows them to measure, which obviously those media have not really been able to do in as closed loop a way. as they have been, as they can now. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
But we've also got a load of live conversations at the moment. So we had a really interesting conversation with Deco last week. So who I mentioned do our smart screens outside of store. There's no reason why we couldn't map the whole of their digital 6-sheet network across the country and identify which Clubcard audiences are most appropriate for different sites.
Yeah.
And if a brand were interested in that, then absolutely, that's a conversation we'd have.
Okay. So if you were to work with, I'm not sure if you've got this granular in terms of working with individual publishers, although I suppose ITV you could say is an individual publisher, but let's say somebody like the Telegraph or the Mail Online, with that sort of penetration into the UK, you would think, and you might tell me if I'm wrong, but you would think that you get quite a high match rate through a clean room in terms of how much of the Telegraph or Mail Online audience shop at Tesco, and therefore how many of your users you can now enrich with this data. Is that what you find?
So currently, the way people can access publisher content beyond broadcasters at the moment is through our Trade Desk partnership.
Okay.
So we're partnership with the Trade Desk. There's no reason why we can't go beyond that in the future. So
could they technically? So could the Trade Desk build a PMP, let's say, and then run that PMP through a clean room, and then be able to service that PMP at the Trade Desk level?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly that. So people can still access broad audiences through all the publisher data that would give them. We've focused on over the last, I guess, year or 18 months. We focused on ensuring we are now the only retail media brands to have all three major broadcasters on board. We've got all three broadcasters on board. We've got Pinterest and Meta, and we've got the Trade Desk. There are other live opportunities that we're talking through at the moment, so we will look to expand it as well. And also, if people are interested in bespoke partnerships at a publisher-specific level, that's absolutely a conversation that we'd have.
Okay.
I think it's fascinating because, as we all know, with the deprecation of cookies, etc., this gives brands one of the only opportunities, really, to think about really crafting their media through publisher data, retail data, and even more and much better than before, being able to understand whether it was impactful or not.
Yeah, that's assuming it works. That's amazing. If it doesn't work, then we're all out of a job. So some people think that there's a lot of hand-wringing and worry that this might just become another walled garden and another body of advertising revenue that gets taken away from the open web. I tend to think of it in a slightly different way, either because I'm naive or overly optimistic. I'm not sure which, maybe a blend of both. But it seems to me that through companies like the Trade Desk currently, and perhaps, I was going to ask, is that an exclusive DSP arrangement so that no other DSPs can also offer it, or is it?
It's the only one we have at the moment.
But it's not as an exclusive, so you would potentially roll it out to others, So there is then an opportunity for publishers to work together with DSPs, perhaps through SSPs, who knows what that looks like, and a clean room, in order to make their inventory addressable and more valuable again, and work as a part of the Tesco media network, if you like, retail network. With the cookies going away and a lot of inventory becoming invisible, basically, in terms of, I don't know how to target this, we don't have first party data, they're not logged in, we can't track them anymore. That seems to me like that you could almost create, and other retailers as well, but you could almost create the biggest walled garden of all across the entire open web and across the other walled gardens. You've already mentioned Meta and Pinterest there. Yeah. So it could be huge, right? I mean, like, absolutely huge. Do you agree? And how big is it today? And how far away is it from where it could be?
So the first thing I'd say is that I think it's better than a walled garden. Because I think if you think about the traditional view of the walled gardens, is what they don't have is the transactional data.
Yeah. And they don't always necessarily have the greatest environment either, and with no disrespect to the company, well, maybe Pinterest would argue with that, I don't know, but like, it's not necessarily the most beautiful layouts, and if you think of a nice double page spread in the Guardian versus a Meta news feed, I read both, they're both fine, but like that, if you wanted a big brand message, I know which one you'd probably prefer.
Yeah. So I think the transactional data takes it to an extra level and ensures that even if it might be even if a brand just wants to advertise within Tesco.com and understand the impact of that, and it drives a return for their business, that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. But I think you make a really good point about a lot of people actually, particularly in the States, who are probably about a couple of years ahead of us in this retail media space. But that's pretty much what retail media will become. Is in addition to all of the retailers' owned assets, is in essence it becomes the fuel through the data to power the open web, as you say. I think that's really exciting, isn't it? You know, a world where marketeers are rightly under pressure to demonstrate return to their boards. I think it takes the potential impact of marketing to the next level and allows real clear demonstration of the effectiveness of it and gives a reason for boards to invest. So I think that's a good thing. That's a really good thing.
I mean, from a brand point of view, if you can, CMOs have, for the longest time, struggled to get brand money signed off because the effects are typically 1 and 2 and 3 years down the line, and finance officers want to see what happened now. But if you can start to prove with empirical data that if we targeted these 10 million people with brand first, and then direct response, and then these 10 million just with direct response, and this was the difference in terms of pounds, shillings, and pence. That's CMOs are going to love that.
Exactly.
CFOs maybe not so much, because they're going to be a few knocks on their doors. Something that just popped into my head there. So, where do you sit as far as the ICO are concerned? Are you a publisher? Do they think of you as a publisher?
I don't know the specific answer to that, to be honest.
Because I was thinking about the data that you're using, albeit anonymized and clean and all the rest of it. How do you get? I've probably pressed accept on this. I don't know. Perhaps I have. I don't know. But do you have to go through the same rigors as a publisher in terms of, are you happy for us to use your data for advertising, and you can reject all and all the rest of it?
Yeah. So as part of the Clubcard sign-up process, that all happens.
Okay.
So yes, people are opted in, and if you're not opted into marketing, then you won't receive anything.
Okay,
so
cool.
All that takes place.
All right. So you think, so you'd be optimistic then if you were like a premium publisher, shall we say, in the UK, you'd be optimistic that the Tesco network could essentially help them to target better advertising, maybe potentially even higher CPM onto their site using your data.
I think so, and let's not underestimate the brilliant work that most of the publishers have done on creating their own first-party data sets, to be honest. So I think there's some amazing work that Reach and News UK and the Times, they've all done.
Telegraph, my old stomping ground, done very
well. They've all done a great job. So brands have a real opportunity to understand great insight from that readership data. But just think how powerful it is if it's associated with retailer data as well. So what it adds is, it adds behavioural sales data to brilliant attitudinal readership, content-driven demographic data. So it's an incredibly powerful mix. So yes, I think both can work together. Absolutely. But they've all been doing absolutely the right thing in the knowledge that things are clearly going to change. So I applaud them for that, but I think there's an opportunity to partner with more moving forward, definitely.
Can you understand why publishers are maybe worried about it? Can you see their sort of point of view? I'm not saying all publishers are, by the way, but you hear on the grapevine that certain publishers are perhaps thinking that this might be trying to sort of take over their place in the world. Because
I can, but I think there's been a bit of a mindset shift. I certainly experienced this when I was head of media at Tesco, about quality of digital advertising and the value of quality. So if you think about the programmatic supply chain study, or think about the real focus on standardization and standards within digital media, the brilliant work that Ozone and people like that have done, then I think there's a push from the buy side to not just accept anything, for there to be really good standards in place, and for as much of that pound that Unilever want to spend on advertising to actually reach the end customer. And that plays in the publisher's hands course it does.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. I think that's a really good thing. I mean, we used to have incredibly strict, and still do, when we were buying media on Tesco's behalf, incredibly strict standards, to do with viewability and fraud and all of those things, which are brand safety, which are critical. And I think all of those things publishers do really, really well. And so the last thing that I would want to do is fuel a open web with poor quality inventory.
Yeah.
That wasn't very viewable,
Yeah.
that wasn't brand safe, and all those things. The last thing we want to do is that. So we absolutely want to ensure that all of those measures are in place for a brand to benefit from.
One of the other big trends in the industry at the moment is attention, obviously, and measuring the attention to advertising. Has there been any studies done where Tesco data has been used to target audiences on the open web versus non-Tesco data being used, and whether there's more attention paid because of the relevance? Has that been done yet with eye tracking?
We haven't done that yet, actually, but we have done quite a lot of eye tracking in store,
right?
As you might imagine.
Yeah.
And that's largely used to understand, best location for screens and things like that.
Yeah.
So we have done quite a lot of that, but we haven't done any tests on web yet. But that's definitely an area we'd be interested in.
Yeah. Okay. So I saw a post of yours on LinkedIn last week that talked about the Vauxhall deal, where they sponsored the Pod Points charging base, which kind of shifted my perception perhaps of a retail media network, because I was thinking very much of everything being on screen, probably as a consequence of working in digital for so long, but I hadn't really thought about the physical store and physical locations. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about that deal and perhaps the scope of the physical world within a retail media network?
Yeah, absolutely love this. So massive shout out to the team at Vauxhall and also at Publicis Media who've worked with us on this, who've been brilliant partners, and we're thrilled that it's launched. There's a couple of reasons why I think it's important. One is that, so so obviously the bulk of our business is with CPG advertisers, so consumer packaged goods. So Vauxhall are what we call a non-endemic brand, so you can't buy a Vauxhall at Tesco.
Not yet.
Not yet. So that's quite interesting, in that it obviously expands the opportunity for retail media into different categories. Tesco has pod points it's back to the relevance and helpfulness point. Tesco has pod points within the UK. Because of the cost of electricity recently, customers were asked to pay for using them within a store. Vauxhall's partnership, part of that partnership, ensures that Vauxhall customers can charge their cars for free within Tesco environment. So brilliant, helps everyone. So really, really good.
If you've got a Vauxhall.
If you've got a Vauxhall. Great partnership, but it will go beyond the pod points. So over the next few months or so, some of the data examples that I've talked about will start to be put in play for Vauxhall, which I think is, again, super exciting.
Yeah.
So we can see how that works. So
are you collecting data of Vauxhall cars or households that you can then overlay with the shopping data, so you can now segment people that have a Vauxhall and shop at Tesco's to reinforce the message that if you come down and maybe shop for a little bit longer, you can charge your car for free?
Exactly that.
Yeah.
That sort of stuff. So that's exciting. In terms of your broader question about, you thought of it as just screens and mobile and things like that, is that so that the in-store environment is still absolutely critical. So 85% of transactions still take place within store. So whilst Tesco.com is massive, the in-store environment is obviously significant. So
I used to work at the Weather Channel, and I remember when I had the interview with Ross Webster, shout out to Ross if he's listening, and he was telling me about the amount of data that supermarkets use just relating to the weather, and how they change their storefronts virtually on a daily basis based on what you're going to see when you first walk in, based on what the weather's doing outside in terms of whether it's raining, snowing, cold, warmer. It blew me away, like the level
Phenomenal.
of data that's involved with that. Yeah, so I can totally understand that the in-store environment's going to be critical with this.
Absolutely. So as I said before, we call it the connected store. So the example I love the most is the scan as you shop devices. So that in essence is bringing the principles of digital media into the store environment. So I don't know if you use a scanner to shop your device. But
the wife has. I
has.
just find it too fiddly
I find
personally.
it too fiddly, but so about 1 in 8 of transactions take place with a scanner to shop device. So that's quite a big business in its own right.
Yeah.
And actually it's on the up, and the reason it's on the up is that people are using it for budgeting purposes given the current environment. So what you can do on scanner to shop devices, I mean the future of what you can do is what excites me the most. At the moment it's Clubcard based, so you would get a different message to me. But think about the future. So it could be accompaniments. So you just put chicken in your basket. Old El Paso could be the most appropriate ad that's served. Or we know you're about to go down the health and beauty aisle. So we know your specific location in store.
Is that something that's for the future?
That's
you're
for the
saying?
future.
Yeah.
But those principles of digital, programmatic, dynamic media within the store environment, I think is super exciting. Because it helps with relevance, helps with personalisation, helps with making that customer experience and customer shop better. And that's what it's all about. So whilst that is a screen, it's a sort of very different form of media than you might anticipate. So excited about that. But even more, what you might consider to be more traditional forms of media. So our in-store audio network, which we actually launched that during COVID.
Right.
And the reason it was originally launched was there wasn't a simple way of a centralised message to be given to customers in store. So the store manager had to go up on the tannoy and talk.
Yeah.
Obviously, given the restrictions and all the safety requirements that were required during the pandemic, we wanted to be quite specific about that at a national level. So we introduced a whole set of centralised tannoys, played music for the staff and our colleagues, and then over time we started to introduce our own messaging. So Food Love Stories started to run on in-store audio, and then eventually we started to sell that to brands, which again has been super successful. So lots of opportunities, I think, for brands to partner, and even things like experiential and sampling, still really important.
Yeah.
So people like nothing more than trialling product in a store and then being able to purchase.
Do you know what I'd love the scanners to be able to do? And you probably tell me that they can now, but it just pops into my head, and this might be stupid. I'm talking out loud, thinking out loud rather. So hopefully this isn't going to make me look like an idiot. But if you could set it at the beginning and say, I'm trying to lose weight, I'm trying to be healthy, sustainable, low fat, whatever, and then do your worst. Tell me as we're going around what I should be looking at, because I hate shopping for food, but I don't ever know what I want if I don't go shopping for food, if that makes sense. If I don't look around and spend the time to actually look and think, do I want that? Well, that might be quite nice. I just end up defaulting to telling the wife I want what I asked for last time, which means I get the same meals, which means I get really bored. But if there was that discovery that I'm actively asking it to do, then the interaction between the scanner and the shopper could be huge.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's great. So one of the ways that Tesco tries to do that at the moment is not really through the scanners, but an initiative called Better Baskets, which is about health and sustainability. So there's a stated ambition for 65% of a customer's basket to be healthy,
right?
Moving forward. So that's flagged in a green, different sort of branding than
as a default.
Yeah, as a default, which does sort of prompt that. Oh, do I need that, or could I think about something a little bit different? So that's quite interesting.
So what are brands that are fighting to get a good space on the shelf and try and sell as much of their product through Tesco's? What do they think about that if they're in that 35% that's probably not very good for you, if they're like sugar or...
Well, obviously there's been a number of HFSS restrictions that have been put in store anyway.
Yeah.
But what you find is that most of those brands are looking for increasingly, because their customers are asking for it, are producing increasingly sustainable and healthy options themselves. So think of the low-no category in alcohol, or baked crisps, or zero-calorie drinks. That many of these brand owners are communicating them more than, I guess, the less healthy options anyway.
Right.
So it just helps them along.
Okay. And the last question I have for you, unless I think of another one between now and the end of this question, came from somebody on LinkedIn, and they said, if you were to look at the open web programmatic ecosystem from its inception, probably back to when Xaxis first launched, to today. What is the one big learning that retail media can take from that to make sure it doesn't perhaps make the same mistakes that the open web perhaps did?
I think that's a great question. So there's a lot of work going on at the moment about standardization in the industry. So I think that's important. So let's make it standardized, let's make it easy for people to access. Let's not have zillions of different formats across the web that people can purchase and sell. So standardization, I think, is really important. And we've got work to do in that space, definitely. We're working with ISBA and the IAB on how we can lead the charge on that. So that I think is the first thing. I think another one is transparency. So, how are you creating the data sources that we're creating? How are we partnering with others? And I don't think that's always been the case on the open web in terms of how those data sources have been. So people should ask questions about, well, how have you created that audience? How have you done
Media
this?
and data has been arbitraged, so you don't really want people to know how you did it, otherwise they can do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's really important, that transparency point. And by transparency, it's not just about audience creation. It's all the way through to, well, how are you measuring the impact? How are you measuring the effect? So we encourage brands to ask those sort of questions. So I would say standardization and what have I just said? I've just forgotten what I've just said. I would say
transparency.
Standardization and transparency.
Good job. I was paying attention.
That's a good job. And I would also say that, and it's linked to the first point, is that quality is as important, if not more important, than quantity.
Yeah.
So there's more than enough inventory out there. We all know that. Is how to ensure it's quality, it's delivering what a brand needs, and as importantly, probably most importantly, it's beneficial for the customer. Because if it's not beneficial for the customer, then it's short term, and you might have made a buck in that week, but you've lost it in the long term, which no one wants.
Yeah, sure. I did have one last question. So is there a lot today of CPG brands or other brands that are looking at or looking to Tesco to help them with the full funnel from brand through to in-store, this sofa to store, as you called it? Are there a lot of brands doing that today where they're thinking, okay, so we're going to target that segment for a period of months, and then in a few months' time, we're going to start a direct response campaign, which is going to try and drive them in? Is that full funnel thing being done now, or has it started at the bottom?
Yeah.
Is it fairly widespread that's happening now?
I wouldn't say it's widespread, but it's definitely happening more. So, best example, we've got Heineken launched a brand called Cruz Campo last year, Spanish lager. Yeah. Every single dollar of their media plan came through the Tesco Media Insights Platform. Now, that did not mean that they didn't have TV on the plan. Didn't mean they didn't have social on the plan. Didn't mean they didn't have outdoor on the plan, as well as all of the digital retail media. They had all of that. But it was all fueled by an audience that the Heineken team wanted us to work with. So there are examples of brands that are really committing to it and are seeing the benefit of doing so. So yes. I think in order for it to maximise its potential, I think there's work still to be done amongst the planning community at agencies. And where we tend to get success and traction is where people understand the potential business impact of the data that we talked through. So like the L'Oreal example that I talked about earlier. Yeah. So I think there's still work to be done there, so people understand it. And having worked agency side, I understand how complex it is fulfilling that role when you've got hundreds upon hundreds of media owners trying to grab your attention. But it's only going one way, I would say, if you look at what's happened in the US and what's happening in other markets. So our doors are always open for people who feel like they want to know more and they want to have conversations with us. So really open for any conversation with anyone on that.
Brilliant. Nick, thank you so much for your time. Really interesting. I think we could have probably spoken for another hour, but thanks very much for being on the Six Sales podcast.
Brilliant. Thanks for inviting me, Mike. It's really enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you.
Likewise.